We only have time today to zero in on three critical areas: crime, religion, and morality. But to understand the ACLU's policies in these and other areas, it's vital to realize that they all belong to a much bigger picture, a picture that comes clearly into focus as we step back to look at the radical roots of the 75-year-old ACLU.
The ACLU is an organization that exists for a singular purpose: to protect the individual liberties through the Bill of Rights and liberties that are protected by the Constitution.
The ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union, and they have taken liberties to the extreme to where liberty is licensed without accountability, and the only place that can end up is in licentiousness.
To better understand the goals of the ACLU, one needs to understand the goals of its founder, Roger Baldwin. A self-professed pacifist, he would later announce his preference for political communism. In 1917, when American troops were defending our liberties in World War I, Baldwin was renouncing U.S. involvement and formed the forerunner to the ACLU, known originally as the National Liberties Bureau, to publicly fight Americans fighting overseas. The newly formed organization encouraged those who opposed the war to fight with him, while he promised his organization would defend them in court. And Baldwin found others who supported his anti-government views, including some of the founding board members who, according to Dr. William Donahue, openly acknowledged their support of communism.
Now, when the ACLU was founded in 1920, it had a group of people who were associated with the far left. In fact, it had a number of people who were proud to call themselves card-carrying members of the Communist Party in this country.
In 1931, a review of the ACLU agenda led a special committee of the House of Representatives to conclude the American Civil Liberties Union is closely affiliated with the communist movement in the United States, and fully 90% of its efforts are on behalf of the communists. In 1935, when Roger Baldwin was 51 years old, he wrote, "Communism is the goal." A year earlier, the ACLU founder declared, quoting here, "When the power of the working class is once achieved, as it has been only in the Soviet Union, I am for maintaining it by any means whatever." And those means would seem to include forcing changes through the legal system. As one syndicated columnist put it, to circumvent the legislative and executive branches of government. Listen to Baldwin's own words, recorded during an interview with Dr. William Donahue shortly before Baldwin's death in 1981.
And we've depended upon the courts as the vehicles by which we assert our interpretations of the Constitution.
It was his conclusion, and he was very open about it, that the Bill of Rights could be used, civil liberties, as a tool for the transformation of American society and along the lines of liberal left thinking.
The charge that if you look at ACLU cases, you will find a political bias toward the left cannot be documented. I know people have made that charge, but they have not made that charge after examining the thousands of cases that we take every year and have taken for 70 years.
Anyone who studies the ACLU, as I have, looked at their archives, looked at the FBI files on the organization, gone through all of the minutes of the board of directors, interviewed the leading people, looked at all of the primary and secondary sources, will understand that the ACLU has been from the very beginning, especially during its first 20 years, I would say, and then again after the mid-1960s, nothing but the legal arm of the liberal left.
From its very beginnings, the ACLU has not sought to protect the liberties of all Americans, but rather to advance its own narrow political agenda. What is that agenda doing to the safety of our streets, our schools, and especially our children?
Where there are rights, there are responsibilities. And this is one of the major complaints that I have with the American Civil Liberties Union. They want to break that inextricable tie between rights and responsibilities. They want to inflate rights, and they don't care a whit about responsibilities. And once you have broken that tie, you've created moral havoc in our society.
An example of such moral havoc can be found in the New York City public school system. Once a fine system with a fine record, now it suffers from the effects of ACLU policies run amok.
I'd say the climate of fear that exists within the New York City public school system is something that will rival almost warlike conditions in some instances.
They would have a lot of fights where they would pick up stuff of the teachers and like hit them with it. They would throw books, they would rip the books apart.
But every time I had any difficulty with a student, you could count on the New York chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union to intervene on the part of a student, no matter how psychotic that student might be.
To the 1.1 million children in the 1,100 public schools in New York City, going to school is potentially hazardous. The problem is that the schools have lost much of their real authority to get rid of the truly unruly students, despite the fact that the total number of security guards assigned to the entire school system is the equivalent of the 7th largest police force in the country.
Schools will no longer chafe the wheat. They will no longer eliminate the negative elements.
Curtis Sliwa, founder and director of the Guardian Angels, is an outspoken critic of the ACLU.
The American Civil Liberty Union's worst contribution to the overall malaise that exists in the school system is that they have not allowed teachers to be teachers and principals to eliminate the bad students from poisoning the mass majority of good students.
In addition to the ACLU's critical role in ousting school prayer decades ago, the New York chapter has fought against the use of metal detectors in schools, a revised truancy program, and the suspension or expulsion of severe troublemakers. And they do all this in the name of individual rights.
The American Civil Liberties Union has actually gone into the school system and sought out, solicited parents and students so as to file for injunctions for any of the preventative measures that security officials or elected officials have tried to apply to get control of the system.
Anything goes with that organization, anything.
Dr. Howard Hurwitz, who served in the New York public schools for 40 years, 11 years as the principal of this school, often crossed swords with the ACLU.
They intimidate principals, always threatening to bring suits against them. They threatened me many times. In fact, there was 1 month in my 11 years when they didn't call for my dismissal, and I looked up to the heavens and asked God, what had I done wrong? They are driven, but not by the Bill of Rights. They're driven by their misinterpretation of the Bill of Rights.
And so many students have to fear for their safety, such as 13-year-old Amanda, who was stabbed by a fellow student.
If they don't like you, they let you, they show it that they don't like you. They would do anything.
While Amanda apparently has suffered no serious long-term harm from the stabbing, other students don't fare so well, such as the 2 students who were shot and killed at Thomas Jefferson High School on the very day the former mayor was on his way to address the student body on the subject of school safety. Incredibly, 55% or more of the crime in the New York City public schools goes unreported. That's because those who might report such incidents fear retribution.
There's no witness protection program in the public school system of New York. Once you finger somebody, all of a sudden you become hunted.
But many of the New York City public schools are not only unsafe for the children, they are also often unsafe for the teachers. In a recent school year, more than 1,900 student assaults against teachers were reported. After meeting recently with many New York City teachers, one union official said, quote, unquote, they didn't want to talk about cost of living raises. They wanted to talk about violence.
And the American Civil Liberties Union doesn't even think twice about the chaos that they create in what was once a very orderly system and probably the finest free educational school system in the world.
I would like them to kick the bad kids out of the school now. The kids that bring in weapons and stuff, because they'll make it easy on us. So we won't have to be walking around scared if we're going to get slashed or anything or sliced while we're walking down the hallway.